Hello, I'm Daisy.
And I'm Hamera.
We are very happy to be joined today by Philip Hammond, who is our local MP of Runnymede and Weybridge.
He is also the Secretary of Defence, so is in charge of policies to do with protecting the country.
Thank you very much for joining us. We've invited questions from the whole school as your role as the MP.
For example, Miss McGregor's tutor group wants to know, what's the best and worst part of being an MP?
As an MP?
Yeah.
Well, being an MP is a fantastically interesting job, mainly because there are so many different things that you get to do, from constituency, casework, visiting schools, businesses, hospitals in your constituency, right the way through to the work at Westminster, scrutinising legislation, holding the executive to account and getting involved in national issues. So the best bit is that it's extremely varied. The worst bit for me is that I don't control my own diary. I'm being sent from here to there and summoned to vote at different times of the day and night without necessarily having any control over that. And I find that, even now, after 16 years, very difficult to get used to.
Ian, in Miss Higgins' tutor group, asked, did you want to be an MP when you were at school?
No, I wanted to be a policeman.
What made you change your mind?
Well, I got involved in politics not even really when I was at university. I mean, I was interested in politics and I studied politics and economics, but my first real involvement with politics was in the 1979 general election, a bit before your time, I imagine. And then after that I got involved on the voluntary side of the Conservative Party, and it was kind of just a natural progression. I kept talking about, one day probably I'll go into politics, one day. And then I got married in 1991, and my wife said to me in 1993, I'm fed up with hearing you keep talking about maybe one day. You either do it or stop talking about it. So I decided to do it.
So we've got some local issue questions now.
Stephen, in Mr. Curran's tutor group, wants to know, can you please update the West Byfleet park facilities in any way?
Very definitely no in that case, because West Byfleet is not in my constituency, so I can't even lobby about park facilities in West Byfleet. That's something that he'd have to talk to Woking Borough Council about. But there is a clear distinction of responsibilities here. MPs can put pressure on local authorities, they can lobby local authorities, but the provision of parks and recreation facilities is very definitely a local responsibility. And of course we have locally elected councillors, and if you really care about the local infrastructure and you really have concerns about the local infrastructure, you need to lobby your local councillors and indeed challenge them in the run-up to the local elections about what's being provided locally.
A few questions from Miss Hour's tutor group. Can you build a skate park in Ottershaw, and can you possibly build a cinema near Newhall?
Well, it would be possible to build a skate park in Ottershaw, in the sense that that is the kind of thing that local authorities can and do. But Runnymede Borough Council, in common with many other local authorities, is struggling with a limited budget and many demands on that budget to provide local infrastructure and local services. So whether a skateboard park in Ottershaw would be very high on the list of priorities, I'm not sure. I'm going to Runnymede Borough Council after I've done this interview with you, so perhaps I'll raise that and ask them. The question of cinema is more complicated, because cinemas are private sector provided facilities. We don't have state-owned or council-run cinemas. They have to be provided by commercial operators. But I can tell you that the new master plan for Addlestone does include a cinema, so I think there's a really good prospect that we will get a cinema in Addlestone in due course.
Many complaints have been said about the canal. There are no street lights to light it up. It's very dangerous in the winter. So do you think you can change that?
Street lights are generally a matter for the Highway Authority, which is, just to make matters even more confusing, not Runnymede Council, not Woking Council, which controlled the two banks of the canal, but Surrey County Council, which is the Highway Authority in Surrey. And again, They have to prioritise limited resources. Your parents don't want to pay higher council tax, and the county council and the local councils have to think about how to use the money that they do get from the council tax in the way that best serves the community as a whole. And that inevitably means that there's a debate about priorities, and it inevitably means that some of the things that people would like streetlights along the canal, can't be afforded. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, would people really be prepared to pay more council tax to get those streetlights put up? I'm not sure if they would.
Okay, so it's going to be about education young people. Do you think 16-year-olds are mature enough to vote?
This is a red herring question. The problem we've got in this country is that very few of people aged 18 to 24 who've had the vote for decades, very few of them actually vote. And I think the first challenge is to increase turnout in the group of voters aged 18 to 24. When we've got all our 18 to 24-year-olds going out and voting, then I think it would be legitimate to ask the question whether we should lower the voting age to 16. But if I go up to the Royal Holloway campus, which is in my constituency, during a general election and stand outside the polling station, you know, sometimes you could fall asleep waiting for the next voter to come up. It's just a simple fact that people in that age group have a very low propensity to vote, and I think that's the problem we need to tackle.
The Year 11s are currently preparing for their GCSEs, but last year the Education Secretary, Michael Gove, said that GCSEs are not fit for their purpose. Do you agree with this?
Well, what Michael Gove said was that we need to make some changes to the GCSE exam to make it fit for the future, and we have to constantly look at how our exams work, how they drive the school system, the curriculum, the way schools operate, and make sure that they are delivering the qualifications and the experience that people need for life and that the country needs in order to be successful in a globally competitive economy. And that's why he's announced the changes that he has.
Would you say that the current GCSEs don't prepare people for the future?
Well, I think the current GCSEs have served their purpose over many years, but the world is changing and we have to reflect that. We have emerging economies challenging us all the time, many of them turning out very well-educated, well-qualified young people who will challenge your generation for the best jobs and the prosperity in this world in the future. And looking ahead 20, 30, 40 years, we have to make sure that you and your generation are able to compete with them on a level playing field.
We got a big response from the school about defence. Do you think cutting spending on defence put the country at risk?
Yes, I do, beyond a certain level. Now, we're going to have a spending review for the financial year 2015-16 after the budget, and I'm preparing for that now. And it would be completely dishonest of me to say that we couldn't take some money out of the defence budget by being a bit more efficient about some of the things we do. We're looking at that now. But cutting any more of our soldiers, sailors or airmen, or reducing the number of planes or ships or tanks or submarines that we have would reduce our defence capability. And it's not, for the mathematicians among you, it's not a linear equation, this. We've got to the point with our armed forces that if we were to take out really quite small sums of money, if we were to take another 2 or 3% out of the defence budget, it would have a completely disproportionate effect on the defence of this country. And that's why I'm fighting my corner for the defence resources we need.
Where should the cuts come from?
Well, you may have read in the newspapers last weekend that I've suggested that we should look more broadly across government spending, and £1 in every £3 that the government spends is spent on welfare. And I think we have to ask ourselves whether all of the money that we spend on welfare is properly spent, whether all of the claims on the welfare budget are legitimate, whether there's anything we can do to tighten up the way we deliver welfare to make sure that only those people who genuinely need it and who are genuinely entitled to it actually get it. So I think there could be some savings there.
It's so expensive to keep nuclear weapons in the country when we've never used them. Could the money be better spent?
Thank God we never use them. That's the whole idea of our nuclear weapons. They are a deterrent and they are a guarantee that any country, any nuclear-armed country that attacks us knows that it will receive a nuclear response. And that's why we have what we call continuous at-sea deterrence. For over 45 years now, we've had nuclear submarines continuously at sea, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, with nuclear weapons on board, ready to deliver a response if anyone attacked us. Many people have said, look, you know, the Soviet Union is dead, Russia is no longer a threat, do we really need these weapons anymore? I would say two things. First of all, the Soviet Union is no longer with us, but Russia is still a very powerful country whose interests do not always align with our own. It still has the world's largest nuclear arsenal and could, although we have good relations with Russia, could in the future pose a threat to us if it chose to do so. But perhaps more importantly, other countries are developing or seeking to develop nuclear weapons. Covertly in some cases, Iran and North Korea most obviously, but they may not be the only ones. The world is getting more dangerous, not less dangerous, and it would be extraordinarily irresponsible to scrap our nuclear weapons at a time when the threat is growing. It also wouldn't save us any money, at least not for many decades, because if we stopped using our nuclear weapons, we would have to decommission them, and decommissioning them would be a hideously expensive process.
I have a few questions about the pay you get in the army. If you're a sergeant in the army, you earn around £33,000. You get paid £135,000 as a government minister. Do you think that's fair?
I think the levels of pay in the army, taking into account all the allowances and the non-pay factors like the availability of housing, is broadly fair. But I recognise that army pay, like all public service pay, has been under pressure over the last 2 or 3 years because of the fiscal austerity that the country is facing. When we've got the economy and our public finances back on track, I hope that we'll be able to address that. In the meantime, what we're doing across the armed forces is targeting those people in the areas that where we have the biggest shortages, some of the specialist skills, where we do pay people additional amounts in order to make sure that the armed forces are competitive with the civilian economy.
It's the 10th anniversary of the Iraq War. It's believed that around 100,000 Iraqis lost their lives because of the war, and 179 UK soldiers were killed. At the time, you voted for the Iraq War. Do you regret doing that now?
Well, I very much regret that Parliament was not given truthful and accurate information about the threat that we faced. We were told at the time, famously, that we faced a clear and present danger of attack by Iraqi weapons of mass destruction on 45 minutes' notice. That's what we were told. And if anyone were to tell me now, we were told that by the Prime Minister of the day, Tony Blair. We can't, and I know this very much now as Defence Secretary, but I understood it then as an ordinary backbench MP, we cannot know and see all the intelligence information which gives Prime Ministers the knowledge to make statements like that. We have to assume that Prime Ministers, holders of the most important office in the country, use the information that they have intelligently and honestly to inform Parliament. And I think I and many of my colleagues do feel that we were misinformed about the situation, the threat that we faced from Iraq, and we voted on the basis of what we were told rather than what perhaps was the real situation.
If you were told about the real situation, what do you think your opinion would have been?
That's a very interesting question, which when little groups of us get together in the evening and perhaps have a couple of glasses of wine, we sometimes talk about. I think, let me answer the question this way. We have clearly become, as a consequence of the experience around the decision-making that led to the Iraq War, we have become much more cautious about intervention of that kind in other countries. There are people out there calling for something to be done about Syria, and the situation in Syria is terrible. But there is a very great reluctance to get involved, a very great reluctance to engage because of our experiences, particularly in Iraq. So yeah, I think there's been some very significant learning done, both by governments and by more broadly by parliamentarians.
North Korea have recently threatened America and taken a tougher stance towards South Korea. Do you think this could affect world peace?
Yes. North Korea and Iran are the two major threats to global stability. The ongoing crisis in the Middle East, more generally the standoff between Israel and the Palestinians, is the other one. But North Korea and Iran, both states that are attempting to test and acquire nuclear weapons and long-range missiles, are major destabilising forces in the world, and we need to deal with them. The approach to dealing with them needs to be different in both cases, but in both cases the peoples of those countries are suffering while their regimes are diverting resources into a mad arms race that they can never win against the United States, but they can cause huge instability in the world in the process.
Mrs. Swan's tutor group wants to know about our troops in Afghanistan and why UK are still there, and also whether we might be sending troops to Mali to help out there.
Okay, well, first of all, on Afghanistan, we're ending our combat mission at the end of 2014, and we're already bringing our troops home. A few hundred came home just before Christmas, some more hundreds have come home over the last few weeks, and quite a few more will come home at the end of March, early April. By the end of this year, we will be down to 5,200 troops in Afghanistan, and by the end of next year, we will have ended the combat mission altogether. But it's important that we come out of Afghanistan in an orderly way. It's important that we continue to train and assist the Afghan army and police so that they can take over the role that we've been playing, maintaining law and order and security in Afghanistan so that people's lives can get back to normal, and that is what is beginning to happen. On Mali, our role is much more limited. The French are in the lead. The French have put ground troops into Mali. We will not do that, not combat troops. We have, however, lent the French a C-17 transport aircraft and some surveillance aircraft, and we've put a small contingent of personnel into Bamako airport to manage those aircraft. And we will contribute to the EU training mission in Mali, which will see about 37 British military personnel join a much bigger EU team to train Malian armed forces. And we're sending some of our people to the neighbouring English-speaking countries, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Gambia and Ghana, to help train their forces so that they can go into Mali and support the Malian forces.
Our final question. The BBC has been asking some students what it's like to be 13 in 2013. And we wanted to ask you what your memories are from when you were 13.
Ah, okay. Well, I know a bit what it's like to be 13 in 2013 because I've got a 13-year-old, so I hear from him periodically. What are my memories of when I was 13? Gosh, 1968 I was 13. Well, you've stumped me here. I'm trying to remember what I can remember about being 13. It's a very uncomfortable age, 13. Very awkward time of your life. And I don't think I enjoyed being 13 very much. I enjoyed being younger and I enjoyed being older. But my memory would be that I really didn't much enjoy being 13.
Mr. Hammond, thank you very much for your time today, for answering all of our questions.